So at this point, we've talked a lot about Azure SQL and the high-level concepts, and now we're going to actually set it up so you have a concrete idea of exactly how it works. So here in the Azure portal, let's go over to SQL Databases on the left-hand side. You can see I don't have any databases right now, so we're going to create a database. And this is going to be a managed database. So what I'll say here is we'll just call this database AppDB. This will be the application database. Later, we'll set up a web app that uses this database. We'll put this in a resource group called Databases. For the source, we're going to do a blank database and we'll load it up with our own data later. And then the important concept here is we need to build a server. And this is going to be a managed server. We don't have to worry about doing the patching or updating or doing anything with the server. Microsoft will manage it for us. But we do need to create this logical server component. So here in the server name field, I'm going to give this a unique name under database.windows.net. So what we'll say here is I'll use my first name and my initials. That's available. I'll go ahead and plug in a login here. We'll call this SQL admin. And then we need to put in a secure password. So I'll go ahead and plug one in here. And then what we're going to do is deploy this server object here in West US 2 in this particular region. And then we'll allow Azure services like web applications in the app service environment to access this SQL server. So go ahead and select that option. And with that complete, what we'll do is basically choose the rest of the settings here. We don't need an elastic pool because we're just going to do a single database. And then down here for the pricing tier, what we'll do is a basic database because this is just for demonstration purposes. And obviously, the higher you go with these plans like standard and premium, the more you pay, the more capabilities you're going to get in terms of read-write performance and things like that. But let's go ahead and pick basic here. And then we'll go ahead and create this database on top of this new managed server object. And we'll open up the notification window here so we can track the progress. So this will probably take a couple minutes. So let's give this a few minutes to run and then we'll pick it up from there. Okay, and after a couple minutes, the deployment has succeeded. So let's go ahead and head over to this resource. And here we can see the properties of the application database, the AppDB database that we just created. And we can see it's on the logical server of mikepf.database.windows.net. So later on, we'll set up an application, we'll put some data in this database, but for now, let's go ahead and head over here under settings in the properties of this database. We'll go to Geo replication. So this will give us the ability to replicate this database. Currently, it's the primary database, obviously, but we want to replicate it somewhere else. So with the Geo replication option here, we can do multiple database copies. I'm just going to do one, but if we scroll down the list here, you can see we have secondaries and Geo replication is not configured. Now, since I picked the West US 2 region, if we scroll back up to the map here, you can see that the Central US region is in purple, indicating that that's the Azure region pair that I should use, preferably, but I can also use all these other ones that are listed out here as well. So let's scroll down the list, and we'll pick West Central US. And on the screen where we're creating a secondary copy of the database, we're going to go ahead and choose the secondary type of readable. Then we need a target server in that secondary region as well. So this is, again, another logical server that we'll create. So I'll call this mikepf2. We'll use an admin login of SQL admin, and then we'll put in our secure password. And then once again, we're going to allow Azure services to access this server. So we'll have a web app running in an Azure app service environment that can access this database. So let's go ahead and choose that. And once again, no elastic database pool, basic pricing tier. Let's click OK to that. So looking at the map here, we can see that the primary database is now being replicated over to the secondary region. And let's give this a minute to run. Once it's all synced up, we'll move on to the next step, which is creating a failover group that'll allow us to dynamically failover or manually failover to that other region. Okay, and that deployment has succeeded, so let's close out of this and let's scroll up. We can see we have a solid line now indicating that the database replication is enabled, so we'll asynchronously replicate any changes that we send into the primary database over to this secondary database. Now let's go back over to resource groups, go into databases, and then notice we've got the primary server object, the database, we've got the secondary server object, and then that secondary copy of the database. So let's go into the primary server. And on the left-hand side, let's go over to failover groups, and this will give us the ability to basically automatically fail over the database if we want to, or we'll have some controls in here to manually fail over as well. But at the end of the day, we're going to have a single name that we can connect to from our application for both of these databases. So let's click on Add Group. So we'll create a new group. This is going to give us, again, a new namespace for both these database copies. So we'll call this mikepf FG1 for failover group 1. database.windows.net, and we'll indicate our secondary server is going to be this server here in West Central US. So again, Mike PF in West US 2 is the primary server right now. The one in the West Central US region is going to be the secondary. So we'll pick that. And by default, the read-write failover policy is automatic, meaning that the Azure SQL service will keep an eye on things. And if there's an issue, it'll automatically fail over within 1 hour here based on these settings. So you could change this to manual if you wanted to handle this manually. But if you leave it as is with these default settings, what this means is once they detect a failure and 1 hour goes by here based on this read-write grace period, then they'll go ahead and fail over that database to that secondary region. So let's go ahead and add our database to this failover group. We'll go ahead and pick the default settings. We'll put appdb in the failover group, click on select, and then we'll go ahead and create the failover group. And this is one more thing that'll take just a second to run. So let's give this a minute and then we'll pick it up from there. Okay, and after just a couple minutes here, the failover group is now built. So let's close out of this. We'll go into the properties of the failover group. And you can see here we've got controls to failover. We do a forced failover if we have to, and that will be basically a failover with data loss. So if we have to actually activate that secondary copy if the original region is completely decimated, we can do a forced failover here. But if we scroll down, take a look, notice we have this read-write listener endpoint. So this is the DNS name we can use in the connection string with our applications that'll point us to the primary copy of the database. And if it ever fails over, based on this automatic failover setting, the application doesn't need to know that anything changed. It'll eventually get to the right copy of the database in West Central US. And that's true whether it's an automatic failover or a manual failover if you do that, if you choose to failover manually as well. So at this stage, the primary database will update that secondary database via asynchronous replication. We can start putting information into that primary database, and everything is set up and ready to go. Now, Azure SQL is definitely a compelling service because it's really easy to set all this stuff up, but let's go to the next video and we'll take a look at Azure Cosmos DB as well. And it'll give you more options as you design your highly available architectures on the Azure platform.